Okay, it works. So thank you for joining this webinar. So hosted by the United Nations University Institute in Macau. So today we have a great presentation. We have the great honor to have a presentation from Dr. Niels Ferrand. So I will maybe just do a brief bio of him because there's too much to say about, about him. So Niels is the senior researcher at INRAE. So for those who don't know INRAE is the French National Research Institute for Agricultural and Environmental Research. And this institute is located in France, in Montpellier. Niels is the lead of a Couplage program. So I guess you will talk more about what is the meaning of this acronym. And this program is about developing and implementing innovative methods to support management and governance of water and territories. So Niels has a strong background in water management, but also in complex system modeling, including AI, policy integration, international project development. So I don't want to make a list here, but he has been working with an impressive number of international organizations and countries all around the world. So today, Niels will talk about participatory and inclusive approaches for enacting the Sustainable Development Goals. So as usual, this seminar, the talk will last something like 30, 40 minutes, if you agree, Niels. And after that, we'll have a Q&A session. So thank you, Niels. The floor is yours now.
Okay, Serge. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Can you confirm, Serge, that you can see my screen, please?
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
So thank you very much for the invitation to the UN University seminar. I'm very happy to make you a quick introduction on some of the work we've been doing for several years in the group, and opening hopefully some discussion about potential expansion and other issues. The main, the main insight for today will be a kind of reconnection between what we've been doing in the Couplage program and the challenges of the SDG implementation in general. The first idea critically is the fact that the implementation of the SDG in reality, the fact to go from the principle to some operational changes at all levels requires to co-engage stakeholders, as most of you know very well, including citizens, and this is a strong focus for us to target population, citizen, lay people, whatever name you give, in very inclusive and very trustable participatory decision processes, not only communication through participation, which is not in our scope, or neither about acceptology, as we call it, which is just getting people to accept something, but really to get them to co-decide and co-engage in a given program. The second insight is very strongly related to our focus on participatory modeling, which is a transversal paradigm that some of you may know, where we actually trust people in their capacity to build models of different things. And the most classical approach is to deal with the social environmental system, so the territory and what people are doing in agriculture and water management, etc. around there. But that can be expanded beyond social environmental dynamics, and they can actually also build model of other things with the same benefit of sharing visions, sharing commitments, and this can be applied to co-decision rules, so participatory processes, for instance, governance, social justice, complex strategies, or impact monitoring. But participatory modeling is really the paradigm behind what we are doing in general. And the third is the fact that for long we've been working on physical low-tech methods where we have only very slightly the use of computers, and they have been validated in practice for robustness and accessibility. However, we need to strengthen the social expansion and digital approach, of course, are important in this field. And so we try to work now on how we can actually do it. Sorry, the background of our group We are a French public research unit with different institutions behind. We are attached to University of Montpellier and other institutions. At least 2 of them are really active internationally, CIRAD and IRD. Some of you may know them. We work on, initially we work on water management and governance, but starting from water, we actually deal with biodiversity, territorial development, land use, and many issues which are inserted in the sustainable development world beyond water. And we work internationally. We have people outposted in different countries in Africa, in Asia, and we also have several connections outside. We focus on engineering methods. So we are researchers, but we research on methods for transforming practices. And so this is really the focus of our work. Instead of being more analytical and descriptive, we are very focused on action research. And so we support public action with governments in different countries, with NGOs, community-based organizations, or public agencies or international agencies. It's a 25 years program which started on complex system management. I will come back to that later. And as you will see, strangely enough, some part of our group really have a strong origin in artificial intelligence. This is my case, in case of other colleagues. Especially in multi-agent models from the 90s, so the early stage of multi-agent models, which is a very interesting paradigm behind the fact of working on complexity and addressing the relation between societies and environment. So we work with, by, and for the stakeholders and for the citizen, the people, as I said. The focus we have is on autonomy and autonomous adaptation, which means bringing people capacity to, or capability, if we take the Amartya Sen approach, on dealing with their own situation, choosing their fate, choosing their objective, and finding ways to achieve that, even if they have restricted conditions. And the final element is that we have a strong concern about ethics. So this is true for interventions, it's true for the tools. And the essential ethics is the fact that when we build something using public funds, because we are public agents, we need to do something efficient and coherent with the real needs of people. So I said a few words about the background. I just removed my toolbar. Yeah. Yeah, this pathway is interesting from multi-agent system in the 90s, going toward sustainable development and integration. And it's a combination between a vision of what knowledge management and process management can be, with a conceptualization of processes, etc. And the other side, the reality of what is in the field. I spend half of my time, more or less, in real field studies with people. So trying to find the right compromise between the expectation of technology and solutions and methods and what is really people's life on the field. And the ultimate focus is supporting change. But of course, change is not always something which is decided autonomously. Very often change is imposed from outside. That's where ethics is important, because we have to address the capacity of people to decide their own change. So an interesting background in regard to this seminar is the work we did with Alan Atkinson for the UN Office for Sustainable Development when it was settled in Incheon in Korea. It was just before Rio +20, and we were required to make a kind of strategy for knowledge management for supporting the design of the national sustainable development strategies of the different countries. But what is interesting is that the initial request was, I would say, very classical. It was essentially capitalizing on existing knowledge base and web services, etc., and making a kind of portal, which is currently what is essentially available. We try actually to push beyond the classical approach of accumulative knowledge management, where you have data and data and knowledge. But ultimately, the value added from this accumulation is not clear. And the actual request of participants in such a context is something quite tricky to requalify. So what we did with Alan was essentially to reassert that decision is really the key issue, and workflow has to be the focus. Not so much the accumulation of knowledge, but actually which knowledge is really useful, not trying to assess what is worth knowing in a given situation of decision. And so we focus on decision support and the idea of sustainable development planning accessible for all. So for all means government, because that was the initial focus of the Office for Sustainable Development, but also for people, and going down to lay people with the problem of illiteracy or access to internet, etc. And of course, we essentially made a recommendation and we proposed some processes. And I just want to come back to this, which was a component of our report in terms of procedure. And it is pretty procedural, and it is also multi-level and inclusive. As you can see here on the right part, you have columns with different set of participants. And these arrows shows the options in terms of intensity of participation. And this is very critical because, of course, if you take the usual mainstream approach of the UN policy sector, it is strongly focused on what we can call the SD process managers, the people who are really steering the stuff, and then the policymakers. And going down to the stakeholders, when we, in the UN language, most of the time when you speak of stakeholder, you are still at the level of intermediary stakeholders, not so much the final people and population. And this intensity is difficult to achieve and reach in the system. So this is part of the thing we try to tackle, and we made some proposal, and we even developed kind of pre-prototype with a colleague from UN called Ola Goransson. But ultimately, it was not clear that starting from the top level at this time, we were discussing with the UN DESA headquarters in New York, etc. That is not probably the best way to do. And we didn't, I think we didn't reach our objective, which was to convince the high-level policymakers that aggregating and accumulating knowledge is not a solution. So where are we now in 10 years later, if you want, after Rio +20, after the expansion of the SDGs, etc., etc. This is part of my address today. So of course, coping with the SDG is essentially coping, as you know, with very complex problems, especially when we want to address the whole bunch of SDGs, the themes, the sub-themes, etc., etc. And on the left, you have a work by Biggs and others on the Nexus vision. Well, one of the Nexus, because there are several Nexus, but one of the Nexus vision. And on the right, you have another vision of the knowledge dimensions of sustainable development. And well, essentially, as we know, it is very interlinked. It is very connected by always. So the problem, of course, for us now is in a context of participation, of real participation with people, how can we get people to cope with such a complexity? And we will have to find the right level of simplicity in this complexity. And this is part of the challenge. The question is whether we will choose methods and procedures, or whether we can choose tools which are actually supporting this coping with complexity. And actually, the first level is kind of a paradox, and this is where this name couplage will come. It's a French acronym, but it doesn't matter. It's essentially the idea is that to cope with change, to cope with adaptation, etc., we need actually to recouple And you know that because of the issue of silos and etc., and disintegration of policies internationally, etc. And the change of recoupling is difficult, and at the same time, it's very important for us researchers working in this field. And there are several things that we can recouple. We can recouple the people, we can recouple the level, we can recouple the issues, the disciplines, etc., etc. So how can we progress in this environment? So I will try to give you some example of what we've been doing. Of course, it's just a small extract of these processes. This is a classical example we give of a project, a European project made in Africa in 5 countries, which was called Afro-Maison with other colleagues, including some of the CGIAR institutions as well. And what we have here is a classical set of participatory steps going down to the level of people, but also including the government, where in all the cases, combining government and lay people in the processes. And what you can see here, dealing in this case with natural resource management in Africa, is that you have several steps of engagement, and this is not so original, but all of these steps are based on participatory modeling, but participatory modeling of different things. Participatory modeling of the environment where people live. Okay, this is classical. But the other part is participatory modeling also, for instance, of the decision procedure itself. So the rules of the game, if you want. And then participatory modeling of strategies, going more at the strategic level. All these steps are combined and aggregated to reach a level of coherent, feasible, and efficient strategies for the people, which is having elements at the, for instance, at the domestic level, as well as at the governmental level, for instance, or for private business. Well, essentially, with a multidisciplinary approach and a multi-level approach, the processes we are supporting always have kind of these structures that you can see here. This is a Uganda case, where in time you have several sessions where people are entering and combining tools to achieve step-by-step changes in their vision or changes in their expectations or in their commitments. And you find everyone from the national to the local level. So behind that, what are the essential rationales of this couplage approach? And couplage being a paradigm, it's an approach and it's a set of tools. So for us, it's a research program for the group. So the first rationale is the fact that we want really to support all stakeholders, from the community members to the top policymakers, going up to UN if it's required, discussing and engaging change strategy. And we work on social hydrological system, but we've been working on biodiversity, the fringes of urban systems, sanitation, several issues related to energy in some countries, etc., etc. I'm dealing with I don't know the actual number, but 30 to 40 countries where it's been used. Improving sustainability, not of the achieve element, but the change pathway. So the idea is that what has to be sustainable is the trajectory by itself. In this idea that the means which are committed for the trajectory have to be controlled. And then you must have something which is also fair in terms of, or equitable, if you want, in terms of engagement of people. And then one idea which is critical is to see to which extent it's possible to reduce external intervention. So it can be taken either from a kind of post-colonial perspective or from a kind of also public economy perspective. And it has similar consequences. And then the idea is to go towards self-conduct, etc., and potentially local institutionalization in the spirit of course, the common resource management, a la Ostrom, etc. Of course, we are scientists, so the challenge is to develop a science and related to this. It's not only a kind of consultancy process. it has to be generalized, and there must be some comparison and repetition so that we are able more or less to get results about the real impact of the elements. That's where monitoring and evaluation is critical, because it will give us, not only us, but it will give also to the people themselves a vision of their own progress and changes so that they can readapt dynamically. And we are going, of course, to a perspective of adaptive management, which was, for instance, expanded in a past European project called New Water with Claudia Paul-Boncel and others. We source in what is called companion modeling. Companion modeling is a group and a paradigm and a posture which was developed in the early 90s by a group of researchers, mainly in France, and which is following a post-normal perspective of the style of Rich and Ravetz, where we tend to legitimate the point of view of people, not to say that when people assert something, it's true. No, it can be, of course, a set of totally wrong perspective on the world, but at least the people must be able to express and enter the decision process. After that, we must manage that there is a confrontation between what is known about the reality and what people assert in the system. And so they can contribute to building models. Of course, they can work with experts to contradict sometimes the wrong vision, etc., etc. And there are several ways of engaging that, but what's important is this relation between models, reality, and experiments. And experiments can be of two kinds. An experiment can be a real-world experiment, so you try something alternative, or what sometimes people do in semi-experiments, etc., which gave a Nobel Prize recently. And on the other side can be also computer-based experiment in simulation, or it can be, for instance, a role-playing game. Role-playing game is a very important apparatus for us in the process. But what is essential is this cycle and this relation between simulation, modeling, and the field analysis. And several things have been done. I invite you to go to the commod.org website to have a look. So in this spirit, and following what I've shown for Uganda, we've been developing different tools focusing on decision stages. The decision stages we consider generally are pretty classical, but not totally classical. The first one is not so classical, is the preparation of decision itself. So for instance, deciding about decision, okay, deciding about participation is a very critical element. That's where the social and institutional rules are predefined by the participants. It's not the case most of the time because the process is imposed from outside by the government, by the public institution. In our case, we have a participatory modeling process addressing the participation itself. So people are engaged in modeling their own participation. That's where we have this method called PREPAR, like pre-participation, PREPAR, which we use. And it's an example of one of these two. We work on diagnosis, and diagnosis can include, for instance, governance diagnosis. And there is a tool which is called SMAG, like self-modeling for assessing governance, which is a tool where a group can actually rebuild a representation of its own governance system. Or we have also tools related to participatory observation, where we ask, or citizen science, where we actually ask people to decide which observation and which science they want to build. So most of the time, citizen science is, again, imposed externally by scientists or experts, and people are committed to just collect data. In this case, we first ask people what they are interested in and to re-question their own environment. And then we have most of the most famous tool we've been developing, which is the theory of water game implementation, where we have more than 150 different implementations worldwide. Water game is the kit for modeling. It's very simple, very basic, where people can model their own situation and use it for role-playing game and transformative game. So the essential idea here is that we don't put a game on the table. They make their own game for their own needs. Okay. Some of my colleagues deal with future visioning and foresight. I won't elaborate on that. And then we have tools dealing with social justice and especially distributive justice. Very simple tool called Just a Grid, where people can formulate their principle of justice outside a given decision, just to give the frame, the fairness frame of a given decision, and which is very important because this separation let them be in what John Rawls in the theory of justice called the veil of ignorance, in ways that they can actually predefine elements without knowing exactly which roles they would be playing in the reality. If you know justice, you probably can see what I mean here. And then, of course, planning by itself and multi-level participatory planning, where the essential point is simplification of some complex economic technical problem in a big plan, but integration of everything. So it means that in the same plan, you can have technical elements like building dikes or irrigation channels, etc., of education, economic instruments, and very social dimensions like, I don't know, getting people to play football to reduce conflicts. Okay, this can be combined in the same. So, what time is it? Serge, what time is it, please?
3:30.
Okay.
9:30 for you.
Thank you. Okay, so this is a set of tools, and I just make a quick overview of the tools, and then the presentation is of course accessible. So participation is this participatory modeling tool on participation itself. So people would actually build a plan and the rules of participation, which is very in line with this idea of the Aarhus Convention, where you let people decide their own conditions of environmental fairness in the procedure. So the essential elements is to get people to decide the roles and methods in the process. So who would do what in the future? Of course, the plan of participation which is made is not a totally rigid plan. It can be adapted later, but it gives a vision of the distribution of power. And people can discuss this distribution of power and clarify the relation, for instance, between government and people to improve trust. Because in this case, there is a clear mandate on both sides. Yes, we have elected representatives and they are democratically elected, and we will work with them. On the other side, you have citizens who have some vision of their own life, etc. So this, what we call participation contract, can be produced by this way, and there are referential for that, which is shared, and then participants can actually co-design a participation plan in this context. This is, for instance, what we are doing now with the Tunisian government for decentralization of natural resource management in Tunisia, and I'm going there at the end of this week to go on with this long-term process. What is interesting is beyond that, and something we find also recently on the New Caledonia government in relation with autonomy, is the relation between the process and the structure. Of course, there is one dimension, which is which structure is emerging from this discussion. Structure is, for instance, the institutionalization of new committees, again, in the spirit of Nina Ostrom, of local management group, etc. And then how it would work. So about Watergame, Watergame has been widely used. It's been used for getting people to build models and games in many cases in the world. The essential idea is the fact that we have proposed a very simple physical tool, which is a bag with cards and marbles. The cost, the production cost is like 25 euros or dollars. And normally people can take it and make their own model quickly. And the model, it can be used later for exploring change. It is essential. So many people do serious games now, etc. Then in this case, it's a game on the game, because it gives capacity to build a local game and then go towards something which is more flexible and also appropriated for local people. So what we do practically is make what we call second order transfer and second order outscaling. By training trainers, we are able to get people to make their own game locally. which we did in different process. And of course, it's a self-expandable process. It's a cascading process if you're viral. This is example in Kenya with IFAD and others. Behind that, there is digital tools. We have an online MOOC, which now exists in mainly in French, in English, and we have a Spanish and Portuguese version, which has to be just put online now. And the process with students or professional trainees, etc., is to get them to follow the MOOC. So we don't make anymore any kind of direct training, but then we support them in building their own case study analysis, full case study analysis, including mapping, including modeling, including game design, including planning, etc. And then they can make products on their case. And recently, with the COVID constraints in the last 2 years, we got all groups to switch. Normally, it was a physical process. That's what you see in these pictures here. But of course, we got people to work totally distantly and make the same models, etc., distantly using very simple tools. We are obedient to Google, I must say, because it's very simple and it gives us many facilities which are very convenient. Of course, on the other side, with this process and workflow, we can include quite much expertise. This is an example of implementation of what, again, dealing with sanitation in Senegal, in a Europed project with some colleagues from former IRSTEA, where you have the whole bunch of expertise on local sanitation, on alternative sanitation, etc., dealing with, of course, the problem of enteric diseases and open defecation, etc., etc. Okay, just skip this one and going to planning. The co-plan method, so is, as I said, a method which can easily combine very different heterogeneous elements and get people to share at least a common language for expressing their proposal of options and putting them together. So it means that if all proposals of action can be expressed with the same meta model, in this case, there can be a dialogue between different and heterogeneous things. And this meta model essentially has two dimensions: the resources which are used for an action and the impact, the expectation of impact for the action. And that's enough for getting a dialogue. And it gives, for instance, access to multiple strategies from sub-communities, from government, putting that all together. A strategy is a set of actions. So, for instance, in this case, we are dealing with, I don't remember exactly, but I think 180 actions in the strategies, and a total of 30 different strategies merged into a territorial strategy for Western Uganda in this case. This is a strategy where you see the strategy is multi-scale and multi-thematic. As an outcome. The last version, again, is digital version where people are doing the same, projecting, this is in Tunisia, projecting it in a simulated space. And so you have a combination between strategic design and implementation in space. Final tool, before I go to the Copilot side, is dealing with monitoring and evaluation. So monitoring and evaluation, most of the time for donors and the big organization, is considered as a control process. For us, it's not a control process. It's an autonomy process. It's a process by which actually we give back to people the capacity to know where they are and where they go, especially in terms of social change. Most of the impact monitoring is related to environment. And in this case, we try to focus more on the social dimension, and that's where we have this ENCORE framework. ENCORE is an acronym for external, normative, cognitive, operational, relational, and equity, which is essentially a way of looking at the situation, the social situation. So we get people to engage into thinking on their situation with this dimension and reflecting on that. Of course, there is a dimension of context, dimension of process, which is a classical procedural monitoring and evaluation. So how it goes on, who comes to a meeting, who speaks, gender issues, age issues, etc., power issues, and then the outcomes in terms of social transformation, social learning. Well, it can be a bit complex in terms of implementation, because you need to measure different things. And actually, you don't need to measure, you need to get people to measure for themselves. So there can be a dimension of self-evaluation, of self-monitoring. Again, because social expansion, you can, as an expert, you cannot be there all the time. You cannot get an anthropologist to be everywhere. So you must get people to manage with that and use simple tools. So now, to conclude my presentation, I want to say a few words on what we've been doing since 2017. As I said, we have a background in AI, but we set aside strong computer-based tools and digital elements, some side supporting elements, but it was not central. Now we've been working more on mirroring the low-tech tools in a digital version, a web platform, with the idea of improving the coupling between the different tools I've shown, and supporting, of course, social expansion by the use of internet. This is obvious. And then processing data. Of course, with all the ethical issues behind the processing of data, but one issue is about participatory workflow. So the fact that we want to get managers and participants to know where they are in terms of the process, how to organize the process, designing the process, etc. We want to get processing of the social routines. What is the social routines? This is the way how people debate, the way how they speak, the way how they interact, etc., and how you can use that. Several people work on that, on e-participation or e-debate, etc. It's important because it can help managers to say, okay, we have not addressed these issues in the SDG. For instance, this part of the SDG world has not been addressed, etc. Then you can reconnect also to expert sources, and that is where classical knowledge management can be interesting, where you can reaccess to data and bring it more easily in the debate or in the dialogue. And then globally helping the pilots, which can be public pilots or alternative NGO pilots sometimes. We work with a social economy company called Resurgence, and we've been developing a meta model, which we have published again recently in IEMS, to make this platform, which is operational now. And we start using it in 2 regions in France. And this is the implementation we have of the Prepare platform. Of course, going to the digital and without having many design means, I would say, we still have to improve a large part of the ergonomy accessibility. So this Copilot platform is having all the tools. You can see that this is the main bar. You have Prepare, Coplan, Core, Watergame, and self-modeling for assessing governance. And we really want to support all the steps. And this is devoted to all categories of users, ultimately in the process. So we come back to what we expected to have sometime in the UN world with this UNOSD design 10 years ago, and now we are doing it ourselves. And we hope that it will be available. Most of what we do is open source and public access, of course. So this is my conclusion. For us, the main challenge and the main question, of course, is on change. Everyone knows these days that since the early alert of the 70s on climate and energy resources with World II and Meadows report, etc., we haven't moved so much in terms of real radical transformation of the policymaking processes. We've raised indicators, the Millennium Development Goals, and then the SDGs. But so what? I mean, the question of the actual implementation transformation is still very high in the agenda. And 3 days ago, the IPCC again alert. Okay, now how would we change? And that is where we really believe that we have to expand alternative tools for going much further than awareness, going toward co-engagement in change, and also letting people realize how much they change, they don't change, equity issues, etc. And behind that, of course, very strongly the power and the politics is fundamental. Participatory modeling with this idea of getting people to model their situation, being acknowledged in this capacity and be recognized in the use of this model is critical. The digital strategy we have is very strongly focused on the procedures. By procedure, I don't mean strict procedure, I mean the pathway, the trajectories, more than accumulating knowledge, more and more knowledge. Okay, we know we have a problem with climate. We know we have a problem with biodiversity. Okay, so what? The next stage is, hey guys, how do we co-engage in something which is actually transformative? So our result now is on a very strong hybrid process, hybrid digital, physical for SD management, and we go much beyond water. We work on transition territories, transition agriculture, etc. How can we build transformative value out of the observation of the decision process? So if we go for digital, we are able to capitalize on data of what people are doing in the decision process, and how can we actually use this data to improve the process itself. And on the other side, we recouple also with more classical mathematical modeling, and I work with a French institution called INRIA, which is working in computer sciences, on recoupling of part of what we do with Wettergame and Coplan with these mathematical models. And just to conclude, this is a large group, essentially French, but working internationally. And I want to thank you in the name of this group.
Thank you, Niels. Thank you for this very broad overview of what you are doing since many years in this research program. Do we have any questions for Niels? Any questions? Mamelo? Yes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make myself visible here. Hold on. Yeah, thanks very much for that great presentation. I've got quite a few questions, but maybe starting off quite broadly high level. So you mentioned at the beginning the importance of ethics within your work and paying attention to that. I'm just wondering, how do you guys, first of all, define ethics within your work? But I think more importantly, how do you operationalize this ethics goal within your work? Because I think sometimes it's easy to for that to be an aspirational goal, because of course it's the right thing to do. We have to be ethical, etc. But sometimes you find it difficult to see how that's being operationalized in projects, both in terms of how is it evaluated, whether you've been ethical or not, etc. So I'm just curious, how have you guys been able to operationalize that idea of being ethical within your research project?
Well, of course, it's probably among the most difficult question, and we have two levels. The first level is what I tend to call meta ethics, which is the fact that we have a kind of universal systematic meta rules in engaging in project and engaging with people, etc., which of course includes conditions of our intervention and action in various countries, with differences between what we do in France or Europe and other places, with all issues related to post-colonial posture, which are clearly present still in this situation. And we have to clarify the mandate and the role of everyone, not to overimpose a system of values. To do that, we have in the pre-participation approach procedure by which we always tend to not impose decision, but impose dialogue on issues. So for instance, the question of multiple groups, ethnic segregation, gender segregation, age segregation is always put on the agenda. And of course, so that's where I call it meta ethics, because our role is not to say that there must be a rebalancing of power between men and women, or between youth and elder, or between ethnic groups, but that there must be a debate inserted in the global participatory design on these issues, for instance. This is one example. Another example is related to imperative knowledge versus lay knowledge and local knowledge. We tend to be very cautious with the presence and participation of classical experts. We are phasing processes. We are separating groups. So for instance, I have also in the resilience conference, I have published some years ago a presentation on what we call shared room principle. The shared room principle is the fact that when we have difficult groups, or groups which are difficult to work together, we get them to follow the same trajectories. This is what we call community of pathway. They do the same separately. Can be the case for men and women, can be the case, for instance, in Ethiopia, at the time of dictatorship in Ethiopia, we were working with local farmers, smallholder farmers, and the government. Of course, the situation was very tense. So the two groups were doing the same, and we were only sharing results between them until time where they felt themselves able to work together and do something together in presence. So these are examples of what I tend to call metaethics. Now, just to finish on that, we also get them to clarify their own internal ethical rules. So we ask them, for instance, for participation to establish their participation rules in terms of voicing, in terms of decision-making, etc., or what is made out of the decision in the process. So we cannot speak of that in 5 minutes, but I think it's very important to have this meta-ethics approach, which is very procedural in a way, and then get the participants themselves to work on their ethics locally.
Yeah, thanks. That's great. And I think one of the steps that I really liked in your project is that prepar stage. I think you call it the preparation stage. Because I think what I've seen a lot is sometimes the participatory projects, they tend to assume a certain level of participation is desired by the stakeholders. Yeah. But in actual fact, you can have projects that go all the way from sort of like nominal participation all the way to transformative participation and still be legitimate, sometimes because the stakeholders don't want to have the burden of responsibility to participate. So I think, yeah, that stage is actually interesting for the participants themselves to decide what level of participation do they want to engage in, versus that also being imposed from outside, because sometimes that can also happen. You assume that people want to participate. So yeah, I found that quite interesting, and the fact that, of course, linking it back again to Sen's notion of capabilities, and so this idea of allowing people to achieve really what they want to be and what they want to do. Found those quite interesting. So anyway, I'll stop that for those 2 questions there. I might come back again later if other people don't have any other questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mamelo, for your great questions. More questions? Do we have more questions here? I have one question about the AI and models, and because we are working here at UNU Macau on the black box effect of AIs and models, and maybe it's not your case for you, because most of the time you use physical tools and low-tech tools for building models, but do you think that maybe there might be some black effects issue, black box effect issue if you use digital tools?
Well, yes, certainly. But especially for people who are not used to technology and dealing with abstract concepts. That was a very strong argument for not using computers. For instance, several colleagues in the companion modeling world, working worldwide, actually tend still to use computers. They make a multi-agent simulation to extrapolate the social dynamics based on the models made by people. I think we have shown that we have a very high acceptability and appropriation of the physical models. Of course, it is a trade-off. The trade-off is the fact that we have more simplicity, because the kind of computation in the physical, there is computation in the physical model. It's analogical computation. We are circulating water. We are circulating resources like money or power, etc. And of course, it's simplification and abstraction. But on the other side, if you try to make a complex social environmental model, it's always limited somewhere. It's not possible to make a kind of universal model. I mean, so there are limitations, and we want also to cope with the question of uncertainty so that people are able to deal with that. But there are other limitations which are more problematic for us. We try to deal with change. So the question of change, if you have a model which is not predictive, because the physical models are not predictive, you can only put on the table questions. You cannot make real claims about trajectories and evolution, etc. In the non-linearity in the system, they are present in this physical simulation and models, but the real value, the crossing of trajectories, etc., in this system is very, very contentious. So we endorse also in the discourse, and it's coming back to ethics, the fact that none of this model is representing a prediction of reality by any way. And the last argument, which is in a way an argument in favor of using computers, is the fact that we cannot do any kind of stochastic exploration. When you make multi-agent social simulation or social environmental simulation, you are able to run several experiments with Monte Carlo, it's technical approaches which are changing parameters and exploring the stochastic spaces, which of course we are totally unable to do, because when you do a simulation with people, you do one simulation, the next simulation they have learned from the previous, so it's not even the same than the previous, and you cannot do more than 2 or 3 because it takes time. So all of these are arguments that must be balanced in this vision. And but it's clear that the black box effects is something we tend to fight against, and that's where also we have this mirror low-tech approach of digital. So it's let's make something which is physical first, where people know exactly what is on the table, and then make a digital mirror of this low-tech stuff, and then we are in a trustable cognitive environment.
Yeah, I really like this idea of digital mirror. Yeah. Other questions? Gabrielle.
Yes, hello.
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 Guten Tag.
Yeah. Guten Tag. Serge, thank you for inviting me to this webinar at the short term. And thank you very much, Niels, for your very interesting presentation. Yes, Serge invited me because we had a participatory modeling workshop during last week with a group where also Mamello has joined, and we are working or modeling on the basis of how to say a holistic systems approach, to say in several steps we make that analysis, but it's a kind of collaborative analysis as with the stakeholders, of course. And the interesting thing is, also, of course, we do some modeling with people with computer-based tools also, but not in the sense of a stochastic or so, also ideas about how future can develop. But what I experienced, so to say, we are doing a lot of projects over many years, like also 20 years or so, with communities in Europe, also in Asia, mainly, until now. And it's very interesting when people understand the systemic interconnection of what they are doing. Also in the sense of the participation, of course, they are included, they are included, but maybe also it's important for them to know about the interconnection and the relevance of their measures. Also, for example, it may be nice to decide about a measure, but maybe in a systemic context, this measure is not so relevant, or so to say, the priority. There would be another priority maybe for another measure which nobody had thought of. Maybe. And so this is why we are doing this exercise, where also Serge and Marmello participated in last week, and which was initiated by Professor Franz Gatzweiler from the Institute of Urban Health in Xiamen. And we have been talking about, let's say, a virtual project about the green spaces of Guangzhou area and how to integrate urban migrants' health in that context. But so it was more an exercise in that to show what this way of modeling is able to do. And I think this is very interesting to connect these two things, to work manually and with a lot of pictures and papers and so on, integrate people, but then also make a conclusion. Also, what is the systemic relevance? So behind me, you see like two kinds of these models. So you have some areas and they are interconnected and they are described with scales. So at what level are we actually, and how do things interact? And so maybe you might be interested, so somehow we could connect once and just see how things work. And because I think we have, and we have another research which I did not show yesterday in our workshops, Serge and Marmello. This is about the SDGs. How are the SDGs interconnected? And then how are the SDGs interconnected with the human needs? So to say, because we have not much time now to reach the goals, sustainable development goals and climate goals also. And it's interesting to see interconnection of SDGs. And also here there is a certain relevance for certain SDGs, which are higher relevant as others, probably. And how can we get people to know what are their real needs, and maybe they can fulfill needs. Also, of course, water and soil and so on, these are very basic needs, so that's clear. This is the main important to build up a viable basis for existence in like desert countries or so. Yeah, you know. So, but maybe I just wanted to use the occasion and to thank you again, and maybe stay in contact to have a further discussion on this.
Thank you very much. About priorities, you spoke about priorities. In social choice theory, this question of priorities is, generally in public policy making, is very important. When we deal with participation, about priorities and clarification of orientation and direction, there is one stage in this loop I showed before, which is the time of choice. But the time of choice is totally framed and driven by the production of the alternative, the initial space of choice. And this is where the real stage of participation is the most critical, because in the same spirit as the problem of prepare for setting the participation arena, there need to be a very open space for building the alternative strategies among which a choice has to be made. And for instance, in Tunisia, where we are supporting the government in a real decentralization with strong participation, we work in 6 regions, and currently we have 11,000 proposals of action, 11,000. So it shows that before going to choice, you have this question of opening the space of decision. And of course, if roughly it means 2,000 action proposals by region, in one region, there will be one strategy. One strategy is a set of action. So it can be, and there is money behind, because there is an implementation budget of almost 70 million euros. So it's not virtual. And so they have to choose for each region, and they means everyone. I mean, we have local committees with men, women, youth, etc., working on that. But where the real choices made is during the first phase, is during the design of this strategy, where they say, okay, now we reaggregate elements and we see how jointly they address our life. And then maybe there is a kind of more greeny strategy or a more economic development strategy. But they just put the bricks together, they build something which has a shape of a house or a castle, and they choose at the end. But the pathway together is the most important, and at the end, the choice is made with different system of voting where we rebalance power. Again, we have collegium in the system, etc. I think we're on a stage. I mean, you are addressing cybernetics and systemic approach of, which started roughly in the 60s or 70s, and there are several models existing. Now, what is important is the fact that we reopen it to everyone, and we managed to, and that's where the digital can help. We managed to help conceptualizing some of the consequences. The problem is computing consequences is not something which is trivial at all. I mean, if we deal only with hydrology, that is fine. But we deal with hydrology, we deal with ecology, we deal with sociology, economy, etc., all together. And I don't trust, as a model, I'm a modeler officially, this is my position. I don't trust our own capacity to make something as a model, complex model, which is giving a view of reality. What I trust is the fact that we have step-by-step support for people to rethink together and build a common ideology of their own collective action. And that is the most important, because that will be the base of this engagement capacity locally, etc. And this is true also for illiterate people. We work with illiterate people. We don't need to have very complex abstraction to do that.
Yeah. No, that's very important, of course. So that's a huge progress also to bring people together. As what we are doing is not, we do not calculate anything. As it's just like we develop the main set of influence factors together, and then people see about how are they interconnected, but they are themselves drawing the interconnections. And with this understanding of the interconnections, they come to that common system understanding. Also, let's say, maybe we should not even use too much the term modeling for this. Let's say we use a kind of modeling tool, we can show it, and of course it's nice to work with it or a computer based, but of course it can also be worked on paper or like you do it. Or also, of course we do that also. And illiterate people, we even have a lot of illiterate people in Bavarian municipalities, so to say. This is not a question of going to Africa or to another continent. Okay. I think we have I think so. Also, I think people are often very complicated that they come to a change and transformation approach, and that they have the courage to change something. This is a broad philosophy.
I think we have one more question from Jingbo. Jingbo, you want to say something?
Hi, Niels.
Hello.
Hi. I have a UN question. Well, first of all, I think it's very interesting that you said the UN stakeholders are most of the time intermediate stakeholders. I found it quite interesting the way that you put it. So the UN question is related to the fact that you mentioned that you used to work with DESA and you're supporting the government or at the country level related to SDG. So would you please share more about your work and also the impact of it? Thank you.
So thank you for your question. We were committed with Atkinson at the time where Tariq Banouri was leading DSD in DESA for actually proposing this general strategy for the UN OSD when it was launched in the Republic of Korea. And we did work for 7 or 8 months on globally assessing and exchanging with some of the leaders on the strategies. And we made a final proposal where I did insist very much on this procedural approach. And ultimately, very obviously, and I feel free to speak about that because we were external consultant and it's more than 10 years ago. The final strategy of UNOSD was very classical. I mean, they did actually start accumulating and aggregating a knowledge base and making training on topics, etc., more than dealing with decision workflow and decision procedure. So I would say in my vision of expert, we failed in transferring this approach, or maybe we were partly not in the right path for this time, knowing also that it was just before Rio +20, and at this time there was a change in the DSD, and DSD was put more toward a diplomatic direction than a technical and scientific direction. And so I honestly, I don't know where is now the UNOSD or where is now the DSD on this topic. What I know, because I follow this more going down, I mean, that's where I speak more of the local implementation, is there is a real consideration of some countries for re-including people in the sustainable development policy design and implementation, accounting for the discrepancies between the intention of a national sustainable development strategy and its implementation. So as soon as you reckon this gap which tend to exist between the intention of SD plan and its making, it's interesting to come back to our real participation. And I think the transition territories, transition cities, etc., is a good instance of this work. And I think the citizen movement, the civil society worldwide, is more and more working in this direction. So I think our responsibility as scientists, etc., or experts in engineering methods, is to support this group to deal with the complexity of this system. And you are certainly SD expert yourself, and you know how running from the 17 or the 300 or whatever toward reality, to our action, is pretty difficult. And this is our challenge.
Thank you. I was just thinking with the well, it's not new anymore, but the second term of the Secretary General of the UN, and he did a big reform of restructuring, basically reprofiling the UN country team. So the resident coordinator is the head to coordinate all the UN activities. He or she is also responsible for reporting SDG implementation and supporting the country in terms of development work. So maybe there's a way to, like, there could be an entry point at the UN country team level. You've been working with some countries, yeah. Uganda, and so I was just thinking of the UN country team, like from that level. Anyway, so I'll just park that in my mind and maybe later to exchange ideas with you. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the for me the stakeholder forum is the level where is important. The problem with some of the stakeholder forum in some countries is that it's actually a pretty high level stakeholder forum. You rarely have a population level stakeholder forum. You have a stakeholder forum which is very close to the governmental level. And our work is not to say that it's better to work at the population level. Our work, our duty, our mandate is to build back the gateway, the bridge between the levels. I mean, this is our responsibility. We have to deal with complexity horizontally between sectors and to deal with complexity vertically between people.
Thank you, Jingbo. You have sometimes do you have more questions for Niels? No, we have done for today. Mamelo, Gabriel.
No more questions from me. That's great. Thank you.
Okay.
Fine, also from my side. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Niels, again for your very great presentation. I really enjoy it, and I guess all the team really enjoy it. Thank you, Gabriel, for joining us. Nice.